Dodge Daytona.
But he became the first man in history to break the 200-mile-per-hour barrier.
Nobody ever dreamed it would grow to this.
One of the most beloved race drivers in the history of the sport, going down into turn number 2. You are watching an incredible moment in the history of motorsport.
The car is on fire.
Try to put yourself in the 1970s. Try to imagine a car that challenged speed like nothing had ever done before.
String out on the back stretch, ready to single file through that third turn.
You might remember this car in a movie, you might have seen it in a magazine, maybe a fanatic was telling you and describing its bizarre shape to you. But hardcore fans will always remember it for one thing: racing.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
Hi there, and welcome to WhyBuy. This is the iconic 1970 Plymouth Superbird, known for its speed, its extreme looks, but most of all, its incredible racing story. In today's market, this is a highly sought after collectible muscle car, but it didn't start out that way. In fact, when the Superbird came to market initially, people didn't want it. They couldn't get past its obscure looks, extreme length, and it was just a hard car to say that I'm gonna daily drive this. I mean, in the 70s, cars were big, but this car was huge. I don't blame people for initially avoiding these cars, but call it what you will. Unusual, different, funny looking, beautiful. There's no denying that the Superbird does one thing extraordinarily well: speed. Back in the 1970s, no one could even imagine a car that would prioritize aerodynamics over styling. But one team, one company, wanted to win races more than anything else. So not only did they recruit their best designers and engineers, but they even tapped into rocket scientists. No, seriously.
Present-day motor cars are indeed going backward, insofar as the efficiency of their body design is concerned. Anyone who has ever put his hand out of a car window and felt the pressure which the air exerted on it might have guessed at the answer to this dilemma: that it lay in overcoming air resistance quite as much, or maybe even more, than in conquering ground friction.
Just look at this nose. When you see this car originally, which was actually a Plymouth Roadrunner, this nose was developed for one particular purpose. We'll get to that in a minute. If you follow me to the back of the car, this is where things get really interesting. This giant aero wing, the big wing era. What was it for? Why was it so big?
And here are some of the startling facts they discovered. First, that air resistance on the front end of an automobile is extremely important. Second, that the power required to drive the car increases as the cube of the speed. Think of it. 8 times the power to double the speed.
Gary Romberg, Bob Marcel, and John Pointer collaborated on something that was absolutely extraordinary. Former rocket scientists basically took a car that you could buy from a showroom floor, but stick it in a wind tunnel so that it could go up to 200 miles an hour. In fact, the only other car that resembled the Plymouth Superbird was the Dodge Daytona that came out in 1969. You have to remember, this was something that wasn't being developed by conventional engineers. This was being developed by scientists, NASA scientists. I had no idea that during the 1970s, or even after the war, Chrysler had an entirely separate division that was developing ballistic missiles in conjunction with Operation Paperclip. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. That's essentially after the war, a bunch of German scientists coming over to the United States. They were working for US companies developing new technologies. And I mean, when you think about developing a car, who better than engineers and scientists who are specialists in aerodynamics?
But he became the first man in history to break the 200-mile-per-hour barrier on a closed race course, and you're watching him do it here in his winged Dodge stock racing car.
There's something that nobody can ever take away from you, being the first guy to run 200 miles an hour on a closed course circuit, and gosh, I'm just tickled to death.
This unusual aero design was really credit to the team at Dodge. But despite how similar the cars look, the Superbird is actually quite a bit different, but we'll get to that in a minute. The origin story behind the Plymouth Superbird is actually kind of interesting. When they lost one of their star drivers to their biggest rivals over at Ford, the team at Plymouth wasn't too happy. And when he was asked, supposedly, the answer was, build me a car like the Dodge team has. He was referring to a track monster, Dodge Daytona. So how do you lure back one of the best drivers who's already having a pretty good season with your biggest competitor? You build him the car that he wants. I'm talking, of course, about the king, Richard Petty.
Richard Petty smashed another record.
Petty is setting new records on every lap. Richard drops into a corner wide open and turns the fastest laps ever run at Daytona in a stock car.
Richard Petty goes back in front, they both spin, they're in the wall.
Flaming going into turn number 1. Fire extinguisher!
Richard's feats in racing are becoming legendary.
That looks like the crash at Darlington years ago, Ned.
Here he comes. What a man. Could this have happened any better?
Here's the winner, Richard Petty of Randleman, North Carolina. Richard, how long have you been in this racing business?
About 5 years now.
This your biggest victory?
This is it. This is the first time I ever won on a major speedway.
In 9 years of stock car racing, Richard Petty has chalked up 75 first places, every one in a Plymouth.
Petty is out in front.
Richard Petty, the undisputed king of stock car racing.
When Richard Petty came up and I met him, I thought he'd fallen in someplace on the way.
I like the way he drives, and I like the way he looks.
Richard Petty. Richard Petty.
He's got the best running vehicle. Everybody likes him because he's a winner.
Holding on to that lead like a hammerhead shark. Here he comes.
Are you just going to keep winning races forever? I'm going to keep on trying, Ned. You can bet on that.
You are going to see a checkered flag for car number 43. Richard Petty has won the 200th race of his incomparable Grand National stock car racing career.
The strongest thing a person has is his mind.
You have one of the winningest drivers in history in one of the coolest designed cars. How did it go? In 1970, out of the 48 races in NASCAR, this in the Daytona, won 33 of those races. You have to imagine, this set a totally new standard for speed. It actually forced NASCAR officials to change the rules of the game. Why would NASCAR officials change the rules? Was it because this was an unfair advantage? Maybe it was too fast for everyone else. Well, their argument was pretty good. It was for safety. Now, nothing had ever seen 200 miles an hour before. Back in the 70s, 150 miles an hour was incredible. Never mind 200. I can't blame them for introducing these new rules because just basic things at that speed weren't really catching up. Tire technology, for example, was not really able to withstand that kind of high heat at that high speed. Whatever the reason, whether it was politics, whether it was for safety, this beautiful car, the big wing era, was over. It got neutered. And after 1970, we never saw this car race again. Despite the fact that NASCAR officials still let people race the big wing shark nose cars in NASCAR, they changed the rules so that the engine had to be under 300 cubic inches, so smaller displacement, and they had to add weight into the car to keep it more safe. The bottom line is it made it next to impossible to race these cars again. So It's kind of sad, but it wasn't the end for these cars. You have to remember, NASCAR is stock car racing. The cars you see in the race are ones you could buy. The old saying goes, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, and this was a car, believe it or not, you could walk into a dealership and buy for yourself.
Head for your Plymouth dealer. You'll see, when Plymouth has a sale, it isn't just good, it's great.
Just look what
You kind of have to ask yourself, would you buy this car if you could at the time? I would think, as an enthusiast, if I had the extra money, yeah, I would want the fastest car driven by the fastest driver. How cool would that be to own? But the Superbird actually sold really poorly. And despite the fact that it was rare, limited production run, they sat on the lots. Now, the rules in NASCAR changed pretty significantly from '69 to 1970. When you think about 1969 and the Dodge Daytona, they only had to make about 500 cars that were sold at dealerships in order to compete. Whereas in 1970, the requirement changed to 1 car for every 2 dealerships. That means Plymouth had to produce about 1,920 cars that had to be sold at dealerships across the country so that they could compete. You have to think, at the time, the reason they did this was a minimum requirement so that they could get this car into the race. But today, it's actually a pretty hot topic because the number of these cars is very important to spot real ones from fake ones. For example, if there was only about 1,900 cars that are on the market, well, it'd be kind of strange if there was, say, 5,000 of them. And believe me, there's a lot of clones and fakes. Rumors have it that it could have been 1920, 1930, even up to about 2,500. No one really knows because Chrysler lost the data, so it's kind of up to the independent registries to figure out how many real ones actually exist. When I look at this car, I don't necessarily blame people for not wanting to run out to the dealership and buy it. You have to think, this was marketed as an everyday car, but in practicality, how would you parallel park this at a grocery store, much less drive it in bumper-to-bumper traffic? You can't even see where it starts and ends. And the practicality of this car, I mean, it's a race car. Who had the extra money to just buy one and keep it in the garage? That's assuming it would even fit in the garage.
That was awesome.
Despite the practicality issues or the fact that people didn't really want them, I really do commend people who bought them at the time because just look at this thing. I love the color. So this is vitamin C orange. Plymouth had the best naming conventions for their color codes. There was only 7 color options that you could pick for the Superbird. There was limelight green, lemon twist yellow, blue fire metallic, tor red, vitamin C orange, petty blue, and alpine white. That's comforting to know.
Got a little rubber there when it shifted. Did you hear it?
Yeah, I heard it.
It just chirped a little.
So a couple of interesting quirks that you might not know about the car. I remember when my dad told me, when you filled up a car in the past, that's where the filler cap was. Cool, but super inconvenient. Or let's take the wing, for example. Now, the height of the wing is always up for debate. Is it because the trunk needed to open to a certain point that it wouldn't hit? Well, this was actually a pretty close guarded secret from Chrysler. They didn't want anyone to know that this was actually precisely calculated using mathematics to maximize the downforce over the rear axle. You wanted to take all of that headwind, shoot it over the nose, and push the rear end of the car down. This is what kept it planted when it was doing 200 miles an hour. So the fact that the trunk doesn't hit, well, that's a good coincidence. You see this Roadrunner decal everywhere? Well, believe it or not, Chrysler paid a fortune to have this not just deckled on the car, but a signature horn as well.
I love the horn.
The Roadrunner actually came from that car right there. The Plymouth Roadrunner was a really popular muscle car, and it was actually the base design for the Superbird. If you can notice, it's the exact same car. You'll see Roadrunner decals kind of hidden all throughout the car. Even when you look in the door, there's one right there. And again, this was really just to help market the car and make it cool. One thing you can't see, however, you have to see with your ears. Just kidding. This right here, come around this side, come around this side.
Does the horn still work?
This is the signature Roadrunner horn. So instead of a conventional horn, it would make that meep meep, which is so cool, especially when you hear this big block V8 roar past you. Awesome. You can actually adjust the tone of the horn with a little screw right here. Priceless. But while we're here, let's talk about the engine. The most desired engine that you could find in these cars was the 426 V8 Hemi that was putting out about 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Now, that engine is an absolute beast. When you think about the size and weight of this car being 3,800 pounds, it could get it up to 60 miles an hour from a dead standstill in 5.5 seconds. The two engines that were less desirable in the Superbird were the Super Commando 440s. Now, you could get it in two options. One, the base model had a 4-barrel carburetor, whereas the 6-barrel upgrade could get you an additional 20-30 horsepower, I think. I think the base engine had about 370, and the 6-barrel could put out roughly 390 horsepower. And I can tell you personally, this car is no slouch.
It's a little bit.
It's a massive engine that when you see it running, it's literally shaking in the car, and the hood's moving like this.
See that? The hood's just shaking.
Down here, we have that really cool, distinct nose. Now, a lot of people think this nose was fiberglass, but it's all steel. In fact, this entire car, I find it so hard to believe, only weighs 3,800 pounds and could do 200 miles an hour. Here's an interesting fun fact. In some states, you were legally required to add a bumper to these cars for safety reasons. This little rubber strip is how they got around that. I'm sure it made all the difference. This is like a kneecap decapitator. It's just like... And while we're down here, it's like a lot of people think the Daytona and the Superbird are the same car, but they're really not. There's a lot of little subtle cues that give it away, and the front end was one of them. You see here on the Superbird, this grille is different. These lights, this entire section is completely redesigned, and it's an interesting reason why they made the car, call it visually improved. Plymouth wanted their version of this big wing car to look better for Richard Petty, even if it was marginally better. They changed things like the nose. They obviously used the base body of the Roadrunner, but they actually even changed the wing in the back. I'll show you. So on the Dodge Daytona, the steepness and angle of this wing is actually a lot more aggressive. And when you think of like, okay, so they wanted to make it aesthetically cooler, But when they tested the cars, the Superbird was actually 3 miles per hour slower than the Daytona. So vanity wins again.
Richard Petty in car number 43 quickly jumped into the lead with Bobby Isaacs in car number 71 in hot pursuit. At the end of 6 laps, Petty is leading the field by 6 seconds. Down the front chute, Petty pours it on and gets by Isaacs as they hit turn 1. Isaac will have to fight Petty now for the win in the Falstaff points.
And this is what I love about homologation specials. Cars that were basically stock, ripped apart, redesigned for the track to win races. At the end of the day, we could go out and buy these cars. Well, the lucky few could. And the fact that you could have a race car parked in your driveway with all the cool technology that had been developed by the teams, it was just so novel and interesting. And I love the fact that racing is what drives car technology forward, because it was kind of like getting more than a car. It was kind of being a part of the race team, having something of your own that was just special and cool. And that's the thing. Homologation cars aren't really perfect luxury cars. They were kind of slapped together in a haste. Just like the Superbird, they didn't have a lot of time to develop it. And you see things like this sort of patchwork that they did to get the car race ready. Or the fact that all Superbirds had a vinyl roof. Now, vinyl roofs are cool because it kind of mimics that convertible aesthetic, but it also hides a lot of welds and imperfections. And if you look carefully, you can see, you know, it's sort of disguising the quick, sort of less than perfect work that they had to do at the time. But that was the whole point. You weren't buying a car for luxury, plushness. You were buying a race car that you could go and get milk. Or if you wanted to just go for a quick cruise at the end of the day, or drive home from work, you could. I mean, a race car for the road. Let's take a look at the interior. Oh. Okay, so lots of vinyl. Good thing about vinyl is that it's very durable, and it was inexpensive. And in fact, when you think about this car, that's probably the whole motif, is high horsepower, something that you could afford. And it wasn't about all these creature comforts. I mean, you'd be lucky if you got, you know, heat or a stereo. This is actually a pretty cool example of a car that was really spec'd to be a race car. There's no bucket seats. There's no radio. The display is very basic. Everything's very simple because, again, you're not buying a luxury cruiser. You are buying a race car. And this is a perfect example of that. Another thing to note is that this has a column-mounted shifter. So it's a 3-speed automatic. You could get it column-mounted or floor-mounted in the car. And then, of course, your other option was a 4-speed manual transmission. The benefit of speccing this car in an automatic is that you had a torque flight transmission. So it was a 3-speed, and it was actually really smooth for the time. This is a car that you could live with and daily drive, and it still put the power down really well. The gearing ratio was short enough that if you wanted to get up to speeds quickly, it was very competent. One of the first things that you notice, aside from the iconic Roadrunner beep beep on the horn in front of you, is the instrument cluster is so simple and easy to, like, the layout is awesome. It's just fuel, temperature, pressures, alternator, and a cool thing, which was kind of exclusive to Chrysler's, you had a clock right in the center of your RPM gauge. That is awesome. Check this out. Oh, the things we take for granted now. It's just simple. It's a driver-focused car. And that's probably the best thing about cars like the Superbird or the muscle car era in general. It was getting access to high horsepower vehicles that really could get up to speeds and challenge what we thought cars were capable of. And yeah, granted, you were taking some risks, safety options and pushing the limits. I mean, you really had to have nerves of steel and, let's face it, quite a lot of balls to drive these cars.
There's nothing like pushing a car as fast as she'll go. It's big trouble now.
You had a broke leg, you got in the car. If your ribs were broke, you got in the car. If your neck was broke, you got in the car. You know, shoulder broke, they taped the dang thing up and put you in the car and you went. And you never thought about not doing it because that was your job. He comes in with his x-ray and he's looking at the lights and looking at it and he said, "When did you have your neck broke before?" I said, "I didn't know I had it broke before."
There wasn't any electronics or stability controls, traction controls. There was nothing interfering to save your life. It was like, it's in your hands, good luck. When this car came out in the 1970s, you could buy one for $4,000, which adjusted for inflation is about 30 grand today. However, let's say hypothetically you wanted one and you searched for it online. Well, brace yourself because this car is probably going to run you.
Oh my gosh!
What a jump! It just leapt from 1.1 million to 1.5. A knockout blow. Usually it's an increment, 50, 100. He just put his fist down and said, "This is my car."
Depending on the condition and spec, this is assuming you can even find one. Starting, you're spending at least 200 grand. If you can find a Hemi, probably over $1 million. If you look at the Superbird from the perspective of aerodynamics, it is truly a beautiful car. And I think for the fact that they developed it in a wind tunnel, the fact that it was developed to be a winning car for NASCAR, it's just an amazing thing to see in person. It's beautiful. It's an absolute masterpiece. Now, I've done a lot of research and I've dug into the people who are following this car, and really this video is for the fans, for the people who really love this car. And I know that for a lot of people, this is something that maybe once in a lifetime they're gonna be able to see with their own eyes. It's that one car where you might catch a glimpse and you know in the back of your mind, like, that might be the only time you'll ever see one. That's how rare they are and that's how seldom you get to see them out and about. So I really want to make this special for people to get close up and personal with this because it's such a privilege to be standing here next to one of these, let alone seeing it out in action. Do you have enough fuel for one more pull? Okay. That was absolutely awesome. Oh man, the car looks so beautiful and we got like the perfect overcast, nice soft lighting. I'm so happy. I just wanted to say thank you to our viewers, our supporters, and most importantly, yesterday's auto gallery. This place is an absolute dream come true. You look around here, I mean, we say this is a car you might spot on a lifetime. There are so many in here that you have to see in person. I can't thank the team here enough for just giving us permission and time to look at these in more detail, get to hear them start up, see them out and about. It goes without saying, if you have ever wanted to see cars like this in person, you have to come to the gallery. They have, you know what? Follow me. The best part is just topping off the day in a 50s nostalgia cafe. This is so cool. Come on, come on. And yeah, I mean, Ted, by the way. So anyways, it goes without saying, watch the chair. And if you thought this video was helpful, please like, subscribe, share, come to this gallery, and thanks for watching. Alpine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red, Petty Blue. There was only 7 colors that you could pick from. Keep going. Alpine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Limelight Green. This is gonna be a tough one to get down. Yeah. There was only there was only 7 colors you could pick for the Plymouth Superbird. Alpine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Tor Red, Petty Blue, Vitamin C Orange. What?
Something lime.
Oh, hey there, sorry. We'll start again, okay. Hey there, and welcome to WhyBuy. This is the iconic 1970 Plymouth Superbird. I feel like I'm not in frame.
Action.
I forgot the line. This right here provided enough downforce to keep the car planted and help it get it up to speed safely. And something else. Get it up to speed safe. Well, I was going to talk about the tires and how, like, it didn't matter if you got up to speed safely with downforce, like the tires would just explode because they were pretty primitive back then, but we'll circle back to that. Pine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Limelight Green, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red. God, there was only 7 color options that you could pick for the Superbird. There was Limelight Green, Lemon Twist Yellow, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red, Vitamin C Orange, Petty Blue, and Alpine White. I think I got them all. I should have just committed. Okay, I'll get them. Yeah. Okay, Alpine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Limelight Green, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red, Petty Blue. Alpine White, Lemon Twist Yellow, Limelight Green, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red, Petty Blue. The Superbird only came in 7 colors, but the names were awesome. Alpine White, Lemon Twist, Green. My brain is scrambled. I might have to voice over this because it's Limelight Green, Blue Fire Metallic, Tor Red. Okay, go. The Superbird only came in 7 colors. Alpine White, Lemon Light Green, Lemon Twist Yellow, no. Lemon Light?
I don't know.
Lime. You know what, we're gonna go with that take, and if it seems funny because I like barely hit it, we're gonna use that.
I think that's how it, I think that's it.
So good. Vinyl just. Back in the 1970s, no one had ever seen a car like this before. I stepped on a plate. Oh, let me show you something really cool. So, one giveaway was that if you saw tailpipes on the back of this and they were chrome tipped and straight back, music. You can hear that in the background. That's probably the best part about this museum. Every time you hear a car start, it's a V8. It's such a good echo chamber. I can't thank you guys enough for letting us come in and cover the Superbird today. I mean, that in itself is like spotting a unicorn. The first time I heard this, when it fired up, that 440 Super Commando was just like, boom, 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 boom. And action. And we had a bit of trouble getting it started at first. Come on,
What?
That's a 440 Super Commando with the upgraded 6-barrel carburetor. That's 390 horsepower. Amazing.
First line at the front.
And just listen to this thing. There's the horn.
And guess what corroded out first? Well, who did fuel injection?
I don't know.
Corvette. With the 426 Hemi in it and the standard transmission, of which they made what? We figure out 56 of them?
Oh, so they'd be going off unintentionally almost.
Well, they'd heat up
expansion.
And then the shoes,
yeah,
couldn't touch them. What was the first car that was mass produced that had disc brakes? Interesting things about why they did that. So this would typically have DOT 4. I don't think the NASCAR cars would have this. And if they did, they'd use speed tape on it. Well, $50,000 they paid Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers had put, you could take this area, calculate at any speed how much downforce this developed. Car sat for a week or two, you hopped into it, and for the first 10 blocks, it's thumped.
I call cars art. This is on another level.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.